and welcome to Vista Talks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Beth Dunn. Beth is a product content leader. She's also been an author, a consultant, and a coach. And in her current venture, she's heading up the exciting journey of that world with Practice Better. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Beth. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because you were one of these magical people that saw HubSpot grow from 50 people to 8,000 people. You've been immersed in this world of content. So over to you. Tell us a little bit about your journey and this wonderful world that you're involved in.
Sure. That really is kind of the headline of my my story. And first, thank you for having me. It's such a delight to be here. So my journey really did start at HubSpot. I mean, my background is in writing and editing, and then into marketing in the nonprofit world. I was a proofreader for Random House Publishing for a really long time as a freelancer, as a work from home from way back. And then I was in nonprofit in marketing and communications, and then in the early 2000s when that social media revolution was really starting to happen. That was when late 2000 aughts, right? That was when I really wanted to get involved in that. And I saw what HubSpot was doing in that world. And so I decided, you know what, I really belong in tech. And so I joined HubSpot, and it was one of those things where I didn't care what role I was in, and back then they onboarded basically everybody, hired basically everybody in a customer support role, just about everybody. That was like the entry level role. And there's no better training in my experience than to start off on the front lines, helping customers every day. So I was onboarding customers every day with no thought of anything called UX writing or content or anything like that. I was just helping customers grow their businesses using our software. And of course, what happens when you're using the software every day is you see places where it can be better. And you hear from customers where it can be better. And so I immediately became the person known for going around to all the engineers' desks and saying, I wouldn't have to have this conversation every call that I'm on if this was worded just a little bit differently. And they'd say, oh, great idea. And they changed the wording on the screen. And I didn't even know that was a thing until we hired our first director of design, Joshua Porter. And he was actually part of the initial movement to sort of formalize this idea of microcopy and UX writing. And he asked me how I spent my time. And I told him that. And he said, oh, you're my UX writer. I was like, far out. What's that? So from then on, I was the full-time UX writer. He made that my full-time job. And I started connecting with other UX writers at other software companies, really just like Google and Facebook were the ones that I knew of at the time, and learning as we went, formalizing voice and tone, working across the company to unify voice. Voice has always been like my primary interest in how to make the user experience really special throughout the entire flywheel, throughout the entire journey. So it's consistent and delightful and meets people exactly where they need to be. Now, I know delight has a bad rap these days, and we can talk about that in a minute, because I'm on the side of delight. I'm pro delight. I'm going to take that stand right here on your podcast. So to kind of fast forward, my journey continued from there. I was the solo UX writer for the HubSpot product team for like 4 or 5 years, and then was able to grow that team, and then lead that team. And then it's this huge thing now. It's really wonderful to have been the solo pioneer and then seeing not just my team grow, but the discipline grow. And I'm a very active participant in that discipline, in that world, in conferences and online spaces, Slack groups, things like that. And it's been such a blessing in my life. I just love it so much. It's such great people in this world doing great work. And so now, I realized I wanted to start building again. I wanted to start building from scratch. I was doing a lot of one-on-one coaching and consulting with startups and with UX writers and content designers. And I found that I was jealous of the people that I was talking to and the work that they were doing, building things from scratch. And I eventually decided I had to make the tough choice that I wanted to go back into that and to kind of start from the ground up again. So here I am at Practice Better, and just loving it.
It's an exciting journey, and I'm sure you saw huge growth at HubSpot during your tenure there. And I mean, you really did pioneer that content design practice, to your point, sort of expanding out how that works. And that sort of global content, I know, resonates throughout a lot of the work that you do. And it leads me on to something I wanted to ask you about, because you wrote a book, didn't you, about cultivating content design. So could you maybe share a
Mhm.
little bit about that with our sort of audience here on Vista Talks?
Absolutely. First, I need to shout out my good friend Sarah Winters, who coined the term content design, and wrote the book Content Design. And stumbling across that was a turning point for me, because that really just turned the light switch on in my head and said, that's what this is. This is a design discipline, right? And so that's why I really prefer the term content designer. And I have lots of friends who like UX writer for really good reasons, right? So the book is not really so much about how to do content design, right? For that, I usually refer people to Sarah's book, or to Tori Podmajersky's excellent book, Strategic UX Writing, or Michael Metzin's and Andy Wellesley's great book. There's some such great books out there now, and there weren't when I was starting. So use them. This is really about how to make it work in your organization, especially for small teams, solo practitioners in larger teams, people, this is so common these days. Right now, there's this moment where there are all of these solo people who have been asked to handle this type of work, and they don't know how to get started and how to convey the importance. Everybody talks about evangelize and advocate, which can be exhausting and emotional labor that you shouldn't be spending all of your time doing. And so the book is really about how to get the work done and advocate for the importance of the work without making advocacy your full-time job.
It makes a lot of sense. And, you mentioned a couple of buzzwords there as well. And today, brands are really trying to connect, aren't they? And we hear a lot about authenticity and engagement and community. But I know a lot of your thinking is grounded in the aspects of getting a brand to tell a better story. And it comes back to that importance of storytelling, doesn't it? So, which helps you, I suppose, connect deeply with the user. So could you maybe expand on that a little bit for us? Because, here at Vista Talks, we love content. We love, whether it's the written word, audio, or video, that's kind of our sweet spot. But content can really engage people. It can really create action. And I know you're a big proponent of getting better at brand storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something that I definitely delved into a lot at HubSpot. I used to run a workshop on storytelling for X, whatever your function was, storytelling for salespeople, storytelling for legal people, storytelling for, and especially it started with work that I was doing with the product marketing team, where they wanted to start leveraging storytelling more in their work. And I think there's a lot of people go about this in a way of like, all right, what's the story arc? What's the classic sort of storytelling arc, and how can we apply that to what we're doing here? Which I think results in a lot of sort of cookie cutter stories, so-called stories. What I call the bad infomercial style, where you start with the problem, it's just grainy black and white. I can't open this jar, and then solution comes along, which is almost always us and our product becomes the hero of the story, and then conclusion, you can now open the jar, which is not really great storytelling, right? So what I try to reframe things towards is, what is the bigger story that we're telling here? And that's one of the things I think always attracted me to HubSpot, is they always knew what the big story was, right? The big story is the world has changed, which I know has become a trope in itself too, but marketing has changed. The power's in the hands of the user. And the web has democratized access to great, content and marketing and sales, the new way of kind of running a business. Brian Halligan used to say, it's not about the size of your wallet anymore, it's about the size of your brain. That was a big shift. That's the story, right? The story is, you have the power. And a lot of the work that I did in these storytelling workshops was about changing the language. There's a lot of red flags you can look at to say, like, when are we saying I and we and my, talking about the brand? And is there a way that we can say you, your, or even we, right? Including the user in the conversation, and shift the focus, always shift the lens to them. They are the hero, their perspective, their point of view. So yeah, the storytelling is about knowing what's the bigger story you're a part of, and how does this one thing that you are working on advance that plot and stay consistent. Users sign up for software thinking I'm enlisting in this story. They may not explicitly think that, but they're like, I want to grow my business. I want to simplify my life. I want to spend more time with my family, whatever it is, right? It's that user story. And so you need to make sure that whatever email you're sending or blog post you're writing or anything like that is a recognizable character in that plot.
I like that. And I think it's very interesting because you've sort of touched on there where it's not just storytelling for the brand, it's storytelling for the individual areas within the company, whether that's sales or marketing or finance or customer support or whatever. And it's designing that story telling ability for each important area. And I really like what you're talking about, because we're big proponents of this, which is the more you talk about yourself, the less you're talking about the benefits that you're providing and how you can actually help the customer or the prospect achieve the goals that they're trying to get to. And you've really touched on that with the way that you position that storytelling. But I have to come back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Where does this surprise fit into this equation then? Because it's hotly debated when it comes to, surprising and delighting customers.
Oh, delight.
Yeah. So let's go back to that, because you kind of touched on that earlier. And I'd just like to get your view on this.
I have to give a shout out again to another personal hero of mine, Andrew Schmidt, who is now at Config, just gave a great talk at Figma, just gave a talk at Config about the end of the era of delightful software. And I recommend it to anybody. I think he's right on. He starts off by talking about the era of confetti. Everything gets confetti behind it. And, he's absolutely right that delight has been sort of bastardized down into this, everything is a confetti moment, which is never what it was supposed to be. Delight is about actually making useful software that does the thing that people want it to do. Right. And to do that, you do have to be centered on the user. Now that's delightful. Getting ahead of what a user needs before they know they need it is delightful. What the opposite of it is frustration. And that's what most people encounter when they're using software. Why can't I do this? How do they not know that this is a thing? Right. Delight is not noticing. Delight is the fact that when I try to tell my family members what I do for a living, they kind of go like this, like, are there words in software? I'm trying to, you mean like error messages? Like they literally don't remember. And that's because it's frictionless. If you're doing it right, it's frictionless and invisible. So how do I feel about delight? Honestly, I still think that there is a place for the well-placed little joke, the little give people a smile, the little message that, the loading screen messages that say you look really nice today or whatever. Like, I love that sort of thing. I think it does bring a smile and a lift to people's lives. I think it's a missed opportunity for your brand if you're not taking advantage of those things. I think the mistake people make is when they try to be delightful and quirky in all places at all times. And that introduces friction. That is a problem, because I'm just here to do a thing. Stop trying to delight me right now, right?
I agree. And I think, it brings to mind for me the word magic. And you said frictionless. And I think when something is frictionless and when something is hidden, it feels like magic. That's what, to me, delights me. Oh, look at how this works. Oh, that's incredible. I wasn't expecting that. That really benefits me. It's that sort of magic or that delight, isn't it, that really rings true. But the more you try to, I love the term confetti, the more you try to artificially make something delightful in inverted commas, the less impact it has. Everybody's trying to do that. It has to really remove the pain or move you closer to your goal, or take away that friction where it just works like magic.
That's right. It just works. It just works. I mean, that is, we'd like to think that's table stakes, but honestly, it's not these days. So yeah, just making stuff that works and is useful and practical and thoughtfully designed. Those are all elements of delight. And again, I do refer people to Andrew Schmidt's excellent talk, which is now available on YouTube. So yeah, everything doesn't need confetti. And this goes for writing too. I mean, a lot of times I will come across designs where people want to say congratulations for everything. Like, congratulations, you successfully sent an email or whatever. Like, that should, yeah, don't congratulate me for everything. I really don't need a graduation ceremony for every stage in the process, right? So I think it's important to define what we mean by delight.
100%. And I have to go back to then, as a global product
Mhm.
content leader, right, which you are.
Mhm. Mhm.
The world has changed significantly recently because we're all talking about AI. You can't go to a conference
Mhm.
at the moment. You can't join an online conference. You can't meet people in person without somebody in the content world talking extensively about AI. It's the hot topic at the moment.
Yep.
Now, I'd be very interested in your view, because obviously as the head of product content, you're moving into this next adventure. You've wrote a book on content. You've really been a pioneer in this space. What are some of your views on artificial intelligence, the tools, the large language models that we have today, and I suppose the balance of that with human-powered content, uniqueness, the richness of storytelling? What are your views? Be very interested to understand that, Beth, from your viewpoint.
Well, it really is still early days. And I don't think we know where all of this is going to end up. But I mean, my views, my experience right now has been there are already some emerging use cases where it makes sense to integrate AI into my workflow. Honestly, um, in the early days at HubSpot, we created a tool that eventually became known as BethBot, which I did not name. But it was a way of, it was a bot. It didn't have any AI in it. It didn't have any natural language processing. It was really just a linter. It was really just a series of if-then statements. But it was a tool that people could use. It was like an internal Grammarly, basically, to make sure that you were consistent with the style guide. And we created that to free myself up from constantly working on creating, I felt like I was spending 95% of my time correcting other people's apostrophe usage, or saying that should be lowercased, or saying, no, that's not what our style guy says. You capitalize the S in HubSpot, whatever it is. You take that burden off of me and I'm free to do more high-level strategic work. And that, I think, is the magic use case for AI. Free us up to do more strategic work. I think it's going to be great for writers. I think it's going to be great for content people. I'm also highly aware of the dangers and the damage that it's already causing, the environmental repercussions, the abuse and exploitation of workers that are involved in a lot of these large language models. I also think that large language models aren't necessarily where the value is. I think that training it on your own content, the smaller language models, is where it's at, right? And people are starting to move in that direction. Tools are starting to move in that direction. I think that native tools are the real winning use case too. Like if it's integrated into my HubSpot, or it's integrated into, my Google Docs or whatever. I don't want to have to go out to another tool to generate and then paste it back in. But that's tactical. I think it's here to stay. I think it's important to figure out how it's going to be useful to us. And I think governance is going to be more important than anything else. Process and governance to say, you don't just generate something and say ship it. Never just have something. I was working on a project not that long ago where the engineers wanted to put in to hook up literally to ChatGPT and have it summarize content and then present it to the users, right? Without any intermediary. And I don't think that we're there yet to be able to do that without hallucinations and without bad information and who knows what. So there does need to be some sort of governance in there. There need to be controls, safety valves, and the human oversight.
Yeah,
Is that it?
they're excellent points, because a lot of corporate entities and brands very concerned about their own content being used to train large language models. A lot of them are going down the route that you discussed, which is building their own sort of in-house
Mm-hmm.
data set, which works off the data that they have. And some brands have got more advantages in that than others. But I think you're right as well, that a lot of the big players, aren't they? They're removing that friction we were talking about earlier, and it will just be built in, whether it's HubSpot or Google or Microsoft or whoever it is.
Yeah.
They seem to be absolutely racing to get this stuff in there. And I think you're right to caution on a little bit of maybe positive skepticism, if that's such a phrase, where we
Yeah.
just tread a little bit carefully
Yeah.
before we get too carried away. Because I'd be interested in the sort of add-on to that question, which is the role of humans in the loop. So whether it's in the language and the localization space and the, having to have that quality control, or whether
Mm-hmm.
it's in the storytelling loop
Mm-hmm.
and the process of, that sort of design-led content, where yes, the machine can help tremendously and it can take away that sort of low-level type task work, but you still at this point seem to need that expert that can sit across it and make sure this rings true with the brand, right?
Mm-hmm. 100%. And I think, Jay Akunzo, another shout out to a great friend who's done a lot of great thinking on this, likes to talk a lot about how the personal storytelling is the thing that an AI can never replicate. You're never going to, an AI is never going to be able to tell that story about what it was like to grow up in my great aunt's Victorian house with her entire 19th century British fiction collection, and how that changed me as a person, and what that has to do with my life as a software designer, right? Personal human experience, and that's basically metaphor. It's basically taking your lived experience and applying it, abstracting out of it a life lesson. Good luck, right? You really need the human element for that. So I think it's going to make storytelling and personal experience even like exponentially more important, right? And so people who have that ability and who know how to apply it strategically, I think are going to be even more and more important. Yeah.
And just to ask you again about something that you said, which really resonated with me, was about, if you can take all that stuff away from me and let me focus on the strategic pieces,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the real sort of sweet spot is for AI at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I've been having conversations with people in our space recently that are in the content development space. They're working with global brands, and there's a sort of a growing feeling that a lot of the people at a senior level are probably operating 2 or 3 levels below where they should be, because of that type of work, because they haven't been able to offload it. And I'm not sure whether that was going through a global pandemic, or whether it was this huge move to, digitalizing a business because you had to. But there does seem to be an awful lot of that non-strategic work being done by people that should be better deployed. And you were kind of talking about that, weren't you? Do you see that a
Mm-hmm.
lot in the content development side at the moment?
I mean, I do. And I think that it's interesting to me that you say that you see it a lot in the larger organization, because I've always thought of it as sort of a side effect of just being in a smaller organization and a startup, or even a larger organization that has really strong startup roots and DNA still in it, where people are just sort of expected to constantly toggle and even integrate the low level strategic and the low level tactical and the high level strategic, and really be a multi-level player in that way. And I do think that AI and any tool basically that allows you to automate those tactical things and spend more of your time in the strategy level, I think that's going to be really powerful for people. And I think that's why I want to caution people to not be afraid, but to explore these tools, cautiously, but to explore these tools and see how they can accelerate their own work, and see how they can accelerate, and always to apply that lens of, how can this free me up to do higher level work? How can this free me up to do higher level work and to empower other people? I think that that's really important, like in anything like AI, where we're all becoming sensitive to some of the exploitation and abuse that is possible with it, we have a choice. We can say to ourselves, how can this actually benefit others? How can this actually benefit humanity, and benefit the people I work with and benefit the user, as opposed to eliminate a department, right? Or, so yeah, if we tune ourselves to the positive effect of things, I think positive things will follow.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's such an important point. And as you were talking, I was also thinking about the plethora of avenues, because there are good actors and bad actors in all areas of life. It's not just in content or AI or the latest technology. But I know you speak a lot and have wrote about, this sort of full stack content design, and the tools and the content stack seems to get bigger and bigger by the day every time somebody launches something. But have you any advice or any sort of thoughts on workflows and producing content? Because whether it's Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, or the new Twitter formats or threads or blogs or newsletters, or everything in audio, written form, video, there's such a TikTok, there's so many different channels now for content. So what are you advising? What are you thinking about as you start this new sort of journey when it comes to all the tools and all the content channels, because they just seem to keep growing? What's your advice for people who are sort of getting drowned by all this stuff that they have access to now?
Okay, so the stack that I talk about, first of all, in Cultivating Content Design, is really it's less about a tool set and it's more about an approach to the work, right? So just for starters, so the stack is basically a simplification of the 7 layers of UX. I basically boil it down into 3 different levels, starting with strategy, and then structure, and then surface at the top, right? And so much of content work is seen as only existing at the surface level. And so that's where I think we can actually take advantage of a lot of these tools, is to automate a fair bit at the surface level, for sure. I think we're starting to see some use cases in the structure, right? Organizing metadata, things like that, tagging. Strategy is where we all want to move more towards, right? And I think that that's where we can actually move more towards if we automate more intelligently and with governance and controls in place. As far as the multiplicity of channels and tools and things, I really like to take an as needed base approach to things. And I also like to go back to my roots as an inbound marketer from the original days of HubSpot, which is to say, no, you don't need to be in all channels. No, you need to fish where the fish are. And so this like really precise understanding of who your target users are, or your audience is, and where they already spend their time. Well, that's where you should be investing. And, part of being a leader and being a strategist is saying no 100 times for every time you say yes. And so you have to have that sort of backbone to be able to say, we're not going to do TikTok right now. Because that's not where our audience is right now, or because we have to say yes to one thing. We're going to do fewer things better, and learn from those things and develop skills that we can then scale, right? So picking a tool or a channel with scale in mind, thinking about like, is this thing something that I can expand from? Am I going to learn things about workflow in creating reels, right, for Instagram? I like to look at that as like, well, I can do that, and it's going to make me a better video producer. It's going to make me a better storyteller. That's going to come in really handy if this time next year I find out that we do need to, get involved in TikTok or whatever. So always thinking about abstracting out the actual skills that you're developing in these very particular channels, because those are changing all the time. So don't get good at a tool, get good at a process, get good at storytelling, right?
Yeah, and I suppose that comes right back to the content stack that you're describing, right? It's a process. The tools always change. They always get better.
Always.
Somebody else always enters the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really sage advice. And look, I don't want to run out of time, but I do want to talk just a little bit about practice better, because I know that's
Mm.
very important from a content perspective and working with sort of health and wellness professionals. But I do like what practice better talk about, which is better engagement, better client support, and better outcomes, something that I
Yeah.
really, strive for, which is better outcomes. So could
Right.
you maybe give us just a little bit about the new part of your
Hmm.
adventure, and also things like your newsletter, because you have
Oh,
a very
sure.
successful newsletter, and just some of the
That's
other
right.
elements that you're involved in?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very excited about Practice Better. Practice Better is a lovely, very exciting company that is a platform for practitioners in the health and wellness field to, again, as you say, to run their practice, to free up themselves to actually do the work that they love, which is working with clients, and to enable them to create better outcomes for their clients, right? So I was just describing it to a non-tech friend of mine the other day, and she was unfamiliar with this concept of B to B to C, right? Which is really the space that we're in here, which means you always have to be looking out to the client. You always have to be looking to how is this going to help the practitioner and how is this going to help the client down the road. So we're all focused on that. And I love that. I love the space. I love the health and wellness space. And I love the people involved in the startup community that I'm a part of right now. And so that's all very exciting. And I love the fact that I get to build this out from a product-led point of view. That's really what I'm being brought in to work on, is think about product content in this flywheel sort of way, non-siloed, right? And I love the opportunity that I have to think about it in that way. So if you think about product content, well, what does that mean? Like, that could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Are we talking about documentation? Are we talking about, onboarding videos? Are we talking about in-app content? Yes, is the answer, right? And it all needs to feed in on each other because the user encounters all of that, seamlessly, right? So it doesn't, right now it doesn't make sense for it to be, owned by these different teams who never talk to each other. So I try to look at it as like an actual integrated flywheel. In-app content needs to build on and support and speak intelligently to documentation, onboarding content, to support reps, to the whole system, because there's no barrier in the user experience between those, and there shouldn't be. So that's very exciting to me. Voicemail is my newsletter. I started it off as weekly and moved it to biweekly. It was on a brief hiatus for a moment while I was taking some time off. I'm going to be restarting it up again, probably by the time this airs. To go back to storytelling, honestly, it is actually personal stories and their application to life as a content person, to a person in development, in software and product, in business, in leadership. I'm also a Gestalt leadership coach, a trained and certified Gestalt leadership coach. And so some of it is just about sort of personal growth and career planning and leadership and choices. So it covers a lot of different ground. I called it voicemail because it is from a place of being a content person who is fairly obsessed with voice and storytelling. But a friend of mine was also joking with me that it's actually just an excuse to go back to my early blogging days, where I just get to write personal stories about what it was like growing up in my great aunt's house with a bunch of 19th century fiction around. So
Well,
I
it's
invite
great.
people to subscribe. It's a fun thing.
Yeah, and a great name. I mean, it's so simple, but it's brilliant. Voicemail. What a great name for a newsletter.
Thank you.
Um, and Beth, is there anything else that you're working on, or is there anything else you want to sort of share with our audience before we wrap up today? And if people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to send people to?
Right now, because I'm starting my new adventure at Practice Better, honestly, I don't have anything super afoot, although I am going to be leading Leadership Day. I'm going to be facilitating Leadership Day at Button in the fall. So I would love for people to join me there. That's going to be a terrific group of people, a kind of closed, safe space to talk about issues and strategies and tactics of concern to people who are leaders in the content design space. So I welcome you to that. And if you want to find me, I'm definitely open to connecting on LinkedIn and probably social. I'm most active on Instagram, but it's really just gonna be a lot of pictures of cats and me running. But if you're into that, I welcome you. I'm on Instagram as The Real Beth Dunn, only because Beth Dunn was already taken, and my website is bethdunn.com.
Well, that's great. Well, look, that brings us lovely to the end of today's show with Beth Dunn. Please make sure that you tune in again to see or listen to another episode of Vista Talks, where once again we'll be catching up with some interesting people with some interesting topics from all around the world. Thank you very much indeed for being a guest today on Vista Talks, Beth. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you.
Thank you so much for having me.